NASCAR.com. Mark Aumann joins us. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hey, Steve and Charlie, how are you guys this afternoon?
We are terrific, but I was going to say I'm looking at your post here for NASCAR.com. Best case scenario, hardly smooth sailing, but Goodyear's quick adjustment earns praise from drivers. No big deal there, but I come down here to where you quote Tony Stewart, and I think the world is actually ending, where Tony Stewart says we need to give 100% credit to Goodyear for this weekend. So every one of us needs to walk through the garage and stop at Goodyear and shake every one of their guys' hands. Oh, my God, Tony Stewart telling Goodyear they're doing a good job. Is the world safe for anyone?
Well, you think about it, and Junior won a race. I mean, it's all topsy-turvy this week.
That's right. The axis has tilted, hasn't it, Mark?
Exactly. I even got home before I had to go back to San Francisco. It's a surprise.
Wow, you never know exactly what's going to happen. But that was kind of an interesting scenario. I guess the question I have to ask you, and I'm sure that you asked some people, was this one. They went in April. They tested tires for this place. They came up with a set of tires that everybody said, hey, these are terrific. The temperature in April, I would have to guess, was probably in the 60s. Did anybody think in their wildest dream that it might get into the high 80s in June?
Yeah, and I think that was put into consideration when they came back with this set of tires because they've used it before. It wasn't actually a new compound. The left sides were actually used at Charlotte either last year or the year before. And I think they thought that the track would rubber in, it would lose a little bit of grip, and the cars would slow down just a touch, and they'd be fine. And I think if they had gotten, a 2020 hindsight, with the rain that we got on Sunday morning, it was a little cooler than expected. It wasn't up in the low 90s as
Right.
it was forecast. They may have been able to get away with it, but I think once they started seeing the blistering problems that were beginning to become an epidemic, I think they realized that they really didn't want to take that chance. And I'm sort of mixed about that. It would have been nice to have seen them run what they ran in qualifying, but at the same point, they were able to get the race in without any major tire issues. And I think Indianapolis 2008 still sticks in their mind as to what they really never want to get back into a situation like.
Well, when we came out of break, we saw a clip from Kurt Busch from Saturday's race. He looks pretty good in that Monster Energy thing. He seems to be so calm and cool and collected when he gets out of his brother's race car, and for some reason he doesn't seem to be able to bring that along, to what he does in Cup. The question that we had this week in our Fast Lap question early on was, does Phoenix Racing's the team personnel backing Kurt Busch, where James Finch went to his team and said, do you want Kurt in this ride? And they said, yes, we do. Does that kind of give Kurt carte blanche to act however he wants the rest of the year, even though he is in probation?
I don't know if it's that as much as that he now feels a little more comfort level in knowing that he's not on a race-to-race basis where if he makes a misstep. Because if you look at the way that Sunday's race started, he spun out 2 laps into the race or whatever it was. I mean, it just seems like everything that can go wrong for him in the 51 does. And I know that James mentioned that he had already had 14 incidents, that they had 14 race cars that they had to repair so far this year. So that makes number 15 right there. And I think that's where a lot of it comes down to, too. I'm not sure it's necessarily all about Kurt's personality, if we're going to use a word to fit that, as much as it is just James can't afford that. And a big-name driver, he was hoping that maybe that would generate some not only publicity but some sponsorship dollars, and I'm not sure that's come in yet.
Well, there were no sponsors on that car on Sunday, so it's there's something going on there.
Right.
Another one of Steve's Fast Lap questions this week, Mark, is something that you and I talked about a little bit on Sunday in a way. Steve's question was, are you surprised at all that there were no pit road speeding penalties at Michigan? After the debacle at Pocono, you and I talked about,
Right.
Did it surprise you that they went totally the other way?
I don't know whether it was that big a surprise as much as I think so many people were, number one, focused on that. Number two, the tire issue was such a big deal. I think that at that point, a lot of it got put in the hands of we don't feel like we can race really hard anywhere we're going right now. Let's not even attempt to do that on pit road. And so many people were coming in with either blisters or worries about blistering at that point. I think at that point nobody was really willing to test the speed limit line that much anyway, because the race was an attrition race, or at least a survival mode race.
We're talking with Mark Aumann from NASCAR.com, and Mark, people have been saying for the last 140 some odd races, all Junior has to do is win, and everything will be right with NASCAR again. The TV ratings will go up, the butts will be back in the seats, and everything will be great. Do you get any feeling at all that one win at Michigan is going to have any effect on NASCAR as a sport in the immediate future?
I thought I'd come home and my mortgage would be paid and the plants would be watered and all. And I assumed that everything would be taken care of and that we'd be in nirvana. But unfortunately, the world is still continuing to go the same way, and it's still not raining here in North Georgia. It was a neat feeling, and I know Charlie can attest to the loudness of the crowd those last two laps, and then when he did the burnout. That's probably as loud as I've heard a crowd other than, say, at Indianapolis in May when somebody takes the lead. And you're thinking at that point 200,000 compared to maybe the 85 or 80,000 that were at Michigan this last weekend. It was a feel-good moment. The question is, he's had a good season. He's been very consistent compared to a lot of the other guys. You think of somebody like a Matt Kenseth has had that kind of a year, Greg Biffle. So he's definitely in the mix. But I think there's a lot of overreaction to the whole, Junior's now the favorite, because it seems like we read that story every week. Wasn't it just 2 weeks ago Jimmy Johnson was the favorite?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think he's doing the things that you have to do to be in contention, which is what has been the biggest issue with him over the last few years to me. He's had a very difficult time staying focused in the car when he needs to make changes and when he needs to relay those over to the crew chief. And I think right now he's as good at doing that as he's been in his career. And I think that's showing. That's where the confidence is coming from, is the fact that the car gets better as the race goes on. And that was the case Sunday. That car got great in the second half.
Yeah. Well, and you can't – in the era of the chase, you cannot win a championship if you cannot win races. And
that's right.
And he's finally won a race. So if he can do it again and maybe do it again after that, then I think he's a contender.
Yeah, let's hope this isn't like Olympic years where we have to wait another 4 years for this to come back around again. But we'll see. Michigan and Charlotte and those kind of tracks is where he's shown power in the past, and he finally closed one out Sunday. We'll see if he can keep doing that.
Yeah, that was a dominant car Sunday. If they can do that at tracks like that, then I think Junior's in the game.
Yeah. To go back to your original question, is this the turning point? Well, it certainly helps, but I don't know that just with Junior on a hot streak is going to really invigorate the fan base that much. It's hard to know. There's a question about where all the eyeballs went, and I don't know that they're all Junior fans. We'll see.
All right, I want to switch gears on you a little bit, seeing as you're a preeminent historian for NASCAR. I wanted to get your opinion on Hall of Fame class for 2012, or is it actually 2013? I've never been able to figure that out.
Yeah, I guess this is the one coming up for next year that they
13.
Voted on this year.
Yeah.
I think that's how it's working. Yeah, 13.
Anybody in there that you think is surprising to you? I don't want to say not worthy because they're all worthy, but
sure.
Anybody that you thought probably shouldn't be in this class that could have waited?
It's one of those things where, of course, because I spend a lot of time looking back at races from the 50s and 60s and 70s, I sort of have a special affinity for the guys who raced back then, and I was really glad to see the voters remember before the modern era. I was really glad to see some of the guys who were really strong in the 50s and 60s get their chance at that point. The Herb Thomases, the Buck Bakers, those kind of guys. Rusty Wallace is a great pick. Again, I'm under the impression they really needed to get one more of the pioneers in if they could have at that point. I would have liked to have seen Fireball Roberts get in. He's the kind of guy who it's difficult to explain to somebody in this day and age what kind of a charisma he had. He was the Dale Jr. of his day, or maybe even more a Dale Sr. of his day, because he was that good. And well known when the sport was still a regional backwoods sport. He was well known around the country. There's a lot of people who knew who Fireball Roberts was, even if maybe they didn't know who NASCAR was. That's the only change I might have made. But Rusty's a fine pick, and the other thing that's difficult there is, with the passing of Cotton Owens, it's you sort of want to get guys in that can give a speech and enjoy the moment.
Right.
And I think that's one of the situations there. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of memorials during the ceremony.
Cotton Owens, Charlie and I haven't really had a chance to talk about Cotton Owens either, but again, you talk about a guy in that Junior Johnson sort of mold, I guess, a guy who is a driver, who is a very well-respected car owner as well. And a lot of people, I don't think, knew of Cotton Owens for the things that he did behind the wheel and as a car owner.
Oh, yeah. One of the favorite stories he told me a year or two ago when I got a chance to sit down with him was the story about him going to Richmond in either 63 or 64. David Pearson was driving for him, and David was sort of a headstrong young guy who wrecked a lot of stuff and wasn't really too much about paying attention to anybody else. And Cotton pretty much was mad at him for blowing a couple of races in a row, and Cotton said, "Tell you what, I'll show you how to do it." He put in his backup car, and Cotton Owens ended up winning the race after having been retired as a driver for about a year and a half.
Wow.
And he pretty much told David at that point, this is what I expect from you. And I think Pearson learned a pretty good lesson. The other neat story there is how Owens ended up firing Pearson. It was over a bag of ice. They were getting ready to go, I think it was to Hickory. And Cotton had the truck ready to go, and he was one of those kind of guys that he was a type A personality. He didn't like waiting. And Pearson and the crew went off to get supplies, and they didn't tell anybody they had left. Owen shows up at the shop. Nobody's there. He assumes everybody's gone to Hickory, so he gives up and he takes the truck back to his house and with a race car on it, and just parks and goes to bed. And Pearson comes back and wonders where everything is, and they assume that Cotton went to the racetrack, and so they drove off to Hickory and didn't find a car when they got there. So on Monday morning, he calls Cotton up, and Cotton says, if that's the way you're going to be, you work for somebody else. And that's exactly how it's split.
Wow.
And they won 2 championships together, and they pretty much had a fight over whether or not they were at the racetrack together.
Wow, that's amazing.
But they were friends forever from there. It was just a disagreement at the time.
Wow. Well, as always, Mark, thanks so much for spending time with us. We really enjoy it, and
and enjoy the weekend in Sonoma with Mrs. Aumann. I know you guys are making a weekend.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's this is there's more damage involved at these races now than there are at Bristol. There's more bumping and banging going on, I think, on the road course. So we'll see how it goes on Sunday. Should be a war.
That's what we had Boris said on earlier in the show, and he said the cars look worse after Sonoma than they do at Bristol. So
it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, enjoy your time out there on the West Coast, and go sample a wine or two while you're out there.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you, guys. You guys have a great night.
All right, we'll do. Thanks. Mark Aumann from NASCAR.com. Make sure you read his stuff. And if anybody knows the history of NASCAR, Mark Aumann is your man.